On my 63rd birthday, my son drove me out to the countryside, stopped by a dilapidated shack and said, "This is your gift. You live here now." He left me deep in the sticks, unaware of who lived next door. A neighbor sort already walking over to help. Hello, my dear listeners. Thank you for being here. If you enjoy stories like this, please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. I always find it fascinating to read which cities and countries you're listening from, so don't hesitate to comment. Now please get comfortable. Happy listening. Until recently, I thought my life hadn't had many events worth a long story. I always lived quietly, unnoticed, even in my own condo, which my late husband Paul and I bought decades ago. I had gradually become like a shadow, just a piece of furniture that took up space but was no longer seen. For the past 10 years, that condo hadn't really belonged to me. It belonged to my son Darren and his wife Tiffany. I occupied the smallest room, the one that used to be a storage closet. My books, Paul's photographs, and the old armchair where he used to read the paper had all been moved there, making space for the trendy, bright, and empty look Tiffany loved so much. I didn't argue. Why bother? The main thing was for my son to be happy. Every morning began the same way. I woke at 6, careful not to make noise or disturb their sleep. I tiptoed into the kitchen, started cooking grits for Darren, and brewed 2 kinds of tea. Strong black for him, and a special herbal blend with petals and imported herbs for Tiffany. A concoction that always made my own throat tickle. I brewed simple black tea for myself and drank it alone in my room, just to stay out of sight. My Social Security check went straight into the joint account. "Mama, why do you need money?" Darren would say, avoiding my eyes. "We buy everything together." I would agree. Why, indeed. My clothes were worn-out hand-me-downs, and I rarely went out, only to the grocery store or the pharmacy. All my wishes had long since shriveled up into one: seeing my son happy. I remember giving them all my savings, money I had set aside for cataract surgery, when Tiffany suddenly needed a new designer handbag. "Mommy, you understand?" she cooed, wrapping her arms around me. "Darren's colleagues are all so high status at the office. I have to match. It's important for his career." Darren nodded, looking at me gratefully. I gave them the money, and later just bought stronger reading glasses instead. My opinion held no weight in the house. If I said the soup was too salty, Tiffany would purse her lips and say, "Mama, you're getting older. Your taste buds aren't what they used to be." If I tried to give my son advice based on life experience, he would gently interrupt. "Mama, things are different now. We'll figure it out ourselves." They figured it out, and I became a function. The cook, the housekeeper, the interest-free ATM, an invisible woman whose presence was convenient but not necessary. Sometimes, sitting in my armchair, I'd look at Paul's photo and ask, "Paul, did we raise our son right? He's a good boy, isn't he?" It's just how life is now. My husband remained silent in the photograph, and I convinced myself I was doing the right thing. After all, a mother should sacrifice herself for her child, shouldn't she? My 63rd birthday arrived just like that. As usual, I expected nothing. Maybe a small bouquet of daisies, which I loved, or a box of my favorite dark chocolates. That morning, Tiffany was surprisingly affectionate. She even hugged me and chirped. "Happy birthday, Mommy," Darren said. "Mom and I have such a gift for you. You'll gasp." I confess. I melted. Something warm stirred inside me. A forgotten feeling of childhood anticipation for a miracle. Darren was unusually flustered, constantly checking his watch. "Get ready, Mama," he said. "We're going to pick up your gift." I put on my best dress, the only one that wasn't worn out. A simple gingham dress with a small floral print. I looked at myself in the mirror, an elderly woman with tired, but for this moment, somehow happy eyes. We got in the car. Tiffany stayed home, citing a headache. "You two go ahead without me," she said, waving. "You can tell me about it later. We drove for a long time. City streets turned into suburban highways, then into dreary fields and woods. At first, I tried to ask Darren where we were going, but he answered curtly, not looking at me. "It's a surprise, Mama. You'll see." I fell silent, looking out the window as my anxiety grew. This road wasn't leading to a resort, a spa, or anywhere a person might celebrate a birthday. It was leading deep into the wilderness. Finally, we turned onto a broken dirt road. The car shook so violently my teeth rattled. Around us were abandoned fields overgrown with weeds and crooked utility poles. Ahead appeared a village, or rather what was left of one. A few houses had sunk into the ground, blackened by time. Not one looked lived in. Darren braked next to the ugliest structure. It wasn't even a house. More like a shack with a sagging roof and windows boarded up with planks. Weeds grew taller than a man, and the fence was rotten. "We're here," he said flatly, turning off the engine. I was silent. I didn't understand. This couldn't be real. It had to be a mistake, a cruel joke. Darren got out, opened the trunk, and pulled out my old canvas bag, the one I used for weekend trips 20 years ago. Inside were a change of clothes, a robe and a bar of soap. He set the bag on the ground beside the weeds. "There you go, Mama," he said, gesturing toward the ruin. "This is your gift. Tiffany and I bought you a house, your own place with fresh air. You'll live here. It'll be good for you." The words fell into the silence like stones into a deep well. I looked at him, my son, and didn't recognize him. His face was foreign, his eyes empty and glassy. There was no malice, no pity, just exhaustion and irritation. "Darren," I whispered, my voice failing me. "What is this? Why?" "Mama, don't start," he grimaced. "We decided this would be best for everyone. You need a break from the city hustle, and we need our own space. Tiffany is pregnant." He tossed the last words out like an excuse for everything. He didn't even look at me. He was in a hurry. He got back in the car and slammed the door. I stood in the road, watching him through the windshield. He started the engine, and when the roar shattered the dead country silence, something inside me shifted. It wasn't rage or hurt or despair. It was something else, deep inside my chest, where for years only warm, forgiving love had lived. Something clicked, loudly, distinctly, like a metal key turning in a rusted lock. Click. And where that warmth once was, there came cold. Absolute, crystal clear ice. The car moved, raising a cloud of dust. I didn't cry. I didn't scream after him. I just watched as the silver side of his imported sedan shrank, turned into a dot, and vanished around the bend. The dust slowly settled. The smell of gasoline dissipated. All that remained was me, my old bag, and a dead house on the edge of a dead town, and a deafening silence. And in that silence, for the first time in years, I heard myself. Not the mother, not the mother-in-law, not the hired help, but myself, Evelyn Reed. And this Evelyn spoke to me in a very calm, very clear voice. "That's it. Enough." I understood that this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. No one would take my life from me anymore. I would take it back myself. The dust raised by my son's car settled onto the tall weeds along the roadside. I stood motionless, listening to the fading drone of the engine. When that too was gone, a silence fell that I hadn't heard since childhood, visiting my grandmother in the country. But that silence had been alive, filled with the chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves. This one was dead, oppressive. I slowly turned and looked at the gift. The timber shack, blackened by time and weather, stood with boarded-up windows. The porch leaned sideways. One step had fallen through, revealing last year's damp, decaying leaves. Around the house grew a riot of weeds, wild raspberry vines tangled with bindweed. It was a picture of complete desolation, a place forgotten by everyone, a place where I had been brought to be forgotten. Tears? No. Inside I was as dry as a desert. That icy click in my chest had frozen everything that might have spilled out in bitter sobs. Despair was gone, left behind in that car that carried my son away. Here, on this abandoned land, all that remained was me, and a cold, ringing clarity in my head. I approached the porch, automatically stepping around the rotten plank, and set my bag on the surviving edge. My gaze skimmed over the misery, but my thoughts were far away. In my bright, clean 3-bedroom condo on Peachtree Road, the very condo where Tiffany was probably that was the key word. The pathetic, orphaned look of this crippled house forced me to recall something I had tried not to think about for years, just to keep from tempting fate. I remembered the words of my late husband, Paul. We were sitting in that same kitchen 10 years before he passed, when he suddenly grew serious and unusually stern. He placed documents in front of me. "Evie," he said, looking straight into my eyes, "I'm going to the attorney tomorrow, and I'm transferring my share entirely to you. You'll be the sole owner." I waved my hands then, asking, "Why, Paul? We're a family. We have a son." But he shook his head. "A son is one thing, but life is long. Anything can happen. You are all I have, and I need to be sure you'll always have a roof over your head. Yours and no one else's." I hadn't thought much of it then, but I did as he asked. After his death, all the documents were filed in my name. Evelyn Reed, the sole and rightful owner. Darren didn't know about this. He believed the condo was a joint inheritance that would naturally pass to him one day. I never corrected him. Why would I? It felt petty, like a lack of trust in my own son. How wrong I was. And then there was a second memory, even more important. About 5 years ago, I received notice of an inheritance. A third cousin of mine from Birmingham, Alabama, someone I had seen only once in my early childhood, had passed away. Alone and childless, she left me her modest 1-bedroom apartment. I went there, handled the paperwork, sold it quickly to the first buyers, and put the entire amount into a separate savings account at the bank. I didn't say a word to Darren or Tiffany. At the time, they were taking out a large loan for a new car. I knew exactly what would happen if they found out about my money. It wouldn't be stolen, no. It would simply dissolve into urgent needs, into status, into our future. Just as my retirement income, my savings, and even my health had dissolved before. I kept silent, not out of greed, but out of an instinct for self-preservation I thought had long since atrophied. That account became my untouchable reserve, my last line of defense that no one knew about. These thoughts flashed through my head not as vague feelings, but as sharp, clear facts. It was as if someone had turned on a light in a dark closet, revealing every tool I still had. I opened my bag. Darren must have packed it in a hurry. An old terry cloth robe, slippers, towels, and a bar of laundry soap. And at the very bottom, among those simple belongings, lay my savior. An old flip phone that Tiffany had once mockingly called a grandma phone. They'd bought it for me years ago so I could stay in touch. The simplest model. No internet, no apps. They had no idea its memory held numbers that were now the most important thing in the world to me. I pressed the power button. The battery was almost full. I had always kept it charged out of habit, but the screen showed no signal. My heart, which until that moment had been steady and cold, fluttered once. Was it all for nothing? I looked around. The town was in a valley. I needed higher ground. Without hesitation, I followed an overgrown path leading up a small hill. My feet caught in the thistles. Branches scratched my face, but I didn't notice. I kept my eyes on the phone screen as if it were a compass. At the top of the hill, beside a solitary crooked cedar tree, 2 faint signal bars appeared. Enough. I opened the phone book and found the number. Mr. Harrison, Bank. Mr. Harrison was the branch manager, about the same age as my late Paul. He'd known me since my husband and I had opened our first savings account together. I pressed call. The rings were long and slow. Then came his familiar, slightly weary voice. "Hello? Mr. Harrison, hello, it's Evelyn Reed. My voice was steady, not a tremor in it. I surprised myself. Evelyn, good afternoon. How can I help you? His tone carried surprise. I hadn't called him personally in years. Mr. Harrison, I need you to do a few things urgently. Right now, if possible. I'm listening. First, I said clearly, please immediately block all powers of attorney and access to my accounts in the name of my son, Darren Reed. Everything. No exceptions. A pause hung on the line. Are you sure, Evelyn? Absolutely, I cut in. Second, all my retirement deposits that currently go into the joint account. I need them redirected immediately to my personal savings account, the one I opened 5 years ago. Do you recall? Yes, of course. I remember. It will be done. And third, I continued, completely block his access to view the balances of any of my accounts. Complete financial isolation. From this minute on, every operation must require my personal confirmation. Personal. I understand, Evelyn. Everything will be executed within 1 hour. Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Goodbye. I hung up. The first part of the plan was in motion. Now for the second. I scrolled through my contacts until I found another number. Marcus Jones, attorney. He had helped me with the inheritance paperwork for my cousin's apartment. A young, intelligent, and meticulous man. He answered almost immediately. Marcus Jones, attorney at law. Marcus, hello. It's Evelyn Reed. We worked together on the Birmingham apartment. Mrs. Reed, of course I remember you. Hello. Has something happened? Something has happened, I replied calmly. I need your help. It concerns my condo on Peachtree Road. I need to officially confirm my sole ownership and prepare documents that will exclude any claims from third parties, including my son. The lawyer paused for a moment, processing what I'd said. I understand you want to completely secure your property. That's wise. Email me a copy of your ID and the property deeds and I'll get started. I can also prepare an official cease and desist notice if necessary. I can't send anything right now. I'm out of town and don't have the documents with me. They're in the condo. But can you begin by making inquiries with the county register of deeds and pulling all the relevant files? Yes, absolutely. I can start immediately. You can count on me, Mrs. Reed. I am counting on you. Thank you. I lowered the phone. The cold in my chest hadn't gone away. But now it felt different. Not the cold of shock, but the cold of steel. The cold of a tool ready for work. I walked back down the hill toward the house. It looked different now. No longer like a grave, but like a temporary headquarters. A quiet, secluded place from which I would wage my bloodless war. And even as I stood there, I knew that in my condo, my home, my son and his wife were probably drinking champagne, celebrating how cleverly they thought they had handled everything. We finally got rid of the old lady, Tiffany would be saying, raising her glass. Now we can start the renovation and live like real people. They were celebrating their victory. They had no idea they had already lost a war they didn't even know had begun. I stood on the threshold of my new refuge. For the first time in years, I took a deep breath. The air smelled of damp and decay, yet it felt clean. It was the air of freedom. For the next few hours, I simply sat on the tall, surprisingly sturdy porch and gazed at the overgrown yard. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft watercolor tones. The air was thick, with the scent of rotting leaves, damp soil, and something else. Something wild and unfamiliar. The city doesn't smell like that. The city smells of gasoline, dust, and other people's haste. Here, time seemed to stand still, frozen along with this abandoned town. When night finally fell, and the cold began to creep under my gingham dress, I knew I had to move. Sitting on the porch wouldn't warm me or quench my thirst. The cold inside my chest gave me strength. But my body had its own needs. I carefully felt my way across the old boards and stepped inside. The air was even heavier there. Dust, mouse droppings, and old compressed wood. It was thick and motionless. Thin strips of moonlight broke through the cracks in the boarded windows, drawing strange, shifting patterns on the floor. I took my old phone out of my bag and turned on the flashlight. The weak beam revealed a potbelly stove with chipped tiles, a table covered in a thick layer of gray dust, and an overturned stool. I felt no fear, only a strange, businesslike curiosity. I walked through the rooms. There were two. One had a sagging iron bed with a rusty spring. The other was empty except for a pile of rags in the corner. The floor creaked under every step, but it held firm. The house was old, yes, but built to last. It hadn't fallen apart. It had simply fallen asleep. My first task was water. I went outside and swept the flashlight beam across the overgrown yard, and there it was. A small miracle. Behind the house, half swallowed by nettles, stood an old well with a frame darkened by time and a heavy oak windlass. The chain was rusty but intact. I struggled to turn the handle. Something squeaked and groaned, but the chain began to lower. A minute later, a dull splash echoed up. Water. There was still water. My first small victory. I found an old galvanized bucket on the porch, miraculously not rusted through, and after a few tries, managed to haul it up full to the brim. The water was icy and smelled faintly of silt, but it was clear. I carried it inside, feeling the muscles in my back ache from the unfamiliar strain. The next 2 days, I worked. I didn't think about Darren or Tiffany. My world had shrunk to this house and its yard. I found an old saw and an axe in the shed, chopped dry branches from a fallen apple tree, and lit a fire in the stove. Smoke billowed into the room at first, but soon the chimney drew properly, and a steady draft filled the house with living warmth. I discovered a bundle of old newspapers and rags, and used them to scrub the table and floor in one room. The wash water turned black. From the shed, I hauled dry straw, stuffed an old mattress I'd found in the attic, and made the bed less hard. I lived like Robinson Crusoe, and the simple physical labor cleared my mind. Each evening, I climbed the hill to check for a signal. 2 bars, my fragile link to the outside world. I didn't call anyone. I waited. I knew they would. It happened on the 3rd evening. I was sitting on the porch, finishing a cup of herbal tea brewed from currant leaves I'd found in the yard, when the phone rang, shrill and jarring against the calm. Darren flashed on the screen. I let it ring a few more times before answering. Everything inside me was steady. "Yes," I said. "Mama, finally. Where have you been?" "I've been trying to call for an hour." His voice carried that familiar edge of irritation wrapped in false concern. "I haven't been walking, Darren. I've been breathing the air. There's plenty of it here." I replied evenly. "Okay, so how are you settling in?" he asked, his tone that of someone performing an unpleasant but necessary duty. "Settling in little by little. Thanks for checking." He missed the quiet irony completely. "Listen, Mama, this thing happened. Tiffany's car didn't work at the store. Your supplementary one. There's definitely money in it. I checked this morning. You didn't accidentally press something, did you? Maybe a glitch at the bank? Call them, huh?" Ah, there it was. The first ripple in the still water of their confidence. I stayed silent, letting him talk. "You need to call and tell them everything's fine," he added, his voice tightening. "Tiffany is upset. She wanted to buy a dress." I could picture it perfectly. My daughter-in-law in some luxury boutique, handing over my debit card, the one that had faithfully received my retirement payments for years, and then seeing the word "declined" flash on the terminal. First surprise, then outrage. How dare it? The old lady's account failed. "Mama, are you listening?" Darren's voice snapped me back. "I hear you," I said quietly. Then I heard the sound of a hand clumsily covering the phone, followed by Darren's muffled voice. "I don't know. She's silent, just sitting there." And then Tiffany's voice, clear, sharp, Cutting. I would have known it anywhere. Why are you even talking to her? She's putting on a show. Decided to act tough in her old age. Hurt her feelings, did we? She'll sit out there in the sticks without a dime and she'll be crawling back soon enough. Tell her not to be stupid. Tell her to fix it. I need that dress. Then Darren again. Quieter. Placating. Tiff, wait. What? Wait. Her voice rose. The guy for the kitchen estimate is coming tomorrow, and we haven't paid the property tax. I got a text about the debt today. Did she turn that off from her grandma phone too? Senility is setting in, I'm telling you. We shouldn't have bought her a house. We should have been looking for a nursing home. Senility. A show. Sit without a dime. The words didn't hurt me. They diagnosed everything perfectly. They confirmed what I had already understood the day Darren left me by that road. To them, I wasn't a person, not a mother. I was a function. Aging, inconvenient furniture that had started to malfunction. And they weren't trying to fix it. They were just angry it had stopped working properly. That last flicker of hope, hidden deep in my soul, whispering that maybe I'd overreacted, maybe I'd been too harsh, died in that instant. The ice in my chest turned to stone. Then I heard Darren's voice again, louder, directed at me. Mama, are you there? So will you call the bank? I drew a slow, steady breath. The air was cool and clean. No, Darren, I said softly but clearly. What? No, you can't or you won't. Disbelief cracked through his voice. Figure it out yourselves, I said, and pressed end call. I set the phone down and gazed for a long while at the darkening yard. I wasn't angry anymore. Just calm, cold, righteous calm. They had passed judgment on themselves. They had called things by their true names. They thought this was my petty little rebellion, my show. They couldn't imagine that it wasn't a show at all. It was the final curtain, and it was falling on them right now. Days passed, blurring into one long deliberate rhythm. I stopped counting whether it was the 4th or 5th. It didn't matter. Out here time wasn't measured by calendars or clocks. It was marked by work done. The swept floor, the bucket of clean water, the stove's first steady flame filling the air with the forgotten scent of warmth and smoke. My anger, the cold, dry anger born on that dusty road, had settled. It hadn't disappeared. It had hardened, become part of me. A quiet, solid foundation. I no longer thought about them, Darren and Tiffany. I thought about myself. It was a strange, almost foreign sensation. On the second day, I decided to explore the attic. I climbed the rickety ladder, expecting nothing but junk and cobwebs. And so it was. But in the farthest corner, beneath a layer of old sacks, I found a small, unlocked wooden chest. I blew the dust off it, and it swirled through a sunbeam streaming in through a hole in the roof. Lifting the heavy lid, I saw inside neat stacks of letters tied with twine, and a thick album in a velvet cover. I carried it downstairs, sat on the porch, and opened it. The faces of people long gone looked up at me. Serious men in uniforms, women in headscarves, round-faced children, weddings, farewells, and simple snapshots taken in fields. A whole life once lived in this house stared back at me from the faded photographs. I didn't know these people, but I felt a strange kinship with them. They had lived, worked, loved, and raised children on this same land. Turning the pages, I thought about my own album, the one left behind in the city, the thick blue one with photos of Paul and me. Our wedding, Darren's birth, his first day of school, college. Here we are together by the ocean. Darren's still a boy, building a sandcastle. And here are Paul and I alone in the park a year before he passed. My condo wasn't just walls and square footage. It was an album too, a repository of my life. Every cup, every book on the shelf, every scratch on the floor was a line in my story. The thought that strangers now ruled that space stung sharper than any reproach. I realized I wasn't fighting for property. I was fighting for my past, for the right to my own memories. With those thoughts, I climbed my little communication hill toward evening and decided to call my lawyer, Marcus Jones, to ask if there was any news. I had no illusions. I knew cases like mine took time, but I needed to know the process was moving. He answered immediately, as if expecting my call. but his voice was tenser than usual. "Mrs. Reed, good evening. I'm glad you called. I was just about to reach out to you." "Is something wrong, Marcus?" I asked. My calm heart gave an anxious leap. "Let's just say we've run into some complications," he said carefully. "I made the preliminary inquiries as we agreed. Your ownership of the condo on Peachtree Road is indisputable. You are the sole owner. Everything is clean. So what's the problem?" I asked impatiently. He hesitated. "Mrs. Reed, there's an encumbrance on your condo." The word was unfamiliar. "What does that mean?" "It means certain restrictions have been placed on your property. It can't be sold, gifted, or otherwise transacted until this encumbrance is removed." "What encumbrance? Where did it come from?" A cold feeling crept back into me, anxious, prickly. Then he said a sentence that split my world into before and after. He spoke softly, almost casually, but to me it sounded like an explosion. "Mrs. Reed, your condo is being held as collateral by a commercial bank. A mortgage agreement for a very large sum was taken out against it." I went silent. I couldn't breathe. Collateral, mortgage, how, when, was all I could manage. "The agreement was signed 8 months ago." Marcus replied. 8 months. Instantly, an image flashed through my mind. Last winter, I had been seriously ill with pneumonia, bedridden with high fever for 2 weeks, mostly delirious. She had been so attentive, bringing me broths, changing my compresses, running to the pharmacy, always busy with some papers. "Mommy, these documents came from the tax office. You have to sign them before the deadline. Don't get up, I'll bring them to you." "Mommy, this is just a form for the HOA, a mere formality. Just initial here." I remembered her slipping the sheets under my pen. I could barely see what was written. The letters swam before my eyes from weakness and fever. I trusted her. She was my son's wife, my family. I signed without looking, just so she would leave me in peace, just so I could sink back into the haze of illness. "Marcus," I said, my voice trembling before I steadied it. "Is my signature on there?" "Yes, Mrs. Reed. According to the documents, you personally acted as the borrower. The signature is notarized, but I've already requested certified copies. There's reason to believe." He didn't need to finish. I understood everything. This wasn't just forgery. It was worse. It was betrayal at the moment of my absolute helplessness. They hadn't merely deceived me. They had exploited my illness, my weakness, my trust. They watched me struggle for every breath, and at the same time, they were calmly slipping a financial noose under my pen. "How much is the sum?" I asked. My voice now sounded like metal scraping on glass. He named the figure. It was monstrous, comparable to the condo's full value. Money I wouldn't see even if I lived 3 more lifetimes. Something inside me broke. That last thin thread that tied me to belief in people, in family, in my son. It didn't just snap. It turned to dust. I saw everything clearly at last. Their plan wasn't just to take the condo. It was far more deliberate. They had taken a huge loan using my home, my life, as collateral. They'd spent it, or planned to, on their beautiful life. The new kitchen, the dress, whatever else. And when the payments came due, they would let the bank take the condo. As for me, they had already moved me out, hidden me away in this wilderness so I wouldn't interfere, wouldn't ask questions, wouldn't find out until it was too late. This ruined house wasn't a gift. It was my tomb, the place where I was meant to fade quietly while they finished consuming the remains of my life. All the bitterness, all the hurt, all the doubt vanished, washed away by a wave of cold, righteous fury. This wasn't anger anymore. It was the feeling that comes when one sees evil in its purest form and knows it must be stopped, not for revenge but for justice, for the memory of my husband who had wanted to protect me, and for myself. "Marcus," I said into the phone, my voice hard as steel. "I understand. Do everything necessary. Pull all the documents. Prepare the lawsuits. We're going to fight." "I've already started, Mrs. Reed," he replied. "I'm on your side. I know," I said and hung up. I walked slowly down the hill. The sun had already set, but I felt as though I could see everything with unnatural clarity. Every blade of grass, every stone on the path. The world hadn't changed. I had changed. Before, I had only wanted to reclaim what was mine. Now, I knew I had to go all the way. They had awakened something in me that I didn't know existed, and soon they would regret it. The news about the mortgage hadn't broken me. It had tempered me. It was as if I had been plunged into ice, then thrust into fire, and instead of cracking, I had hardened into steel. Until then, I thought I was fighting for my past, for memory, for fairness. But now I understood. I was fighting for my future, for the right simply to live. The next few days passed in a blur, not the fog of despair, but of razor-sharp focus. I stopped noticing the discomforts around me. The squeaky bed, the icy water, the tasteless canned food from the cellar. My body worked automatically, handling chores, while my mind moved with cold precision. I cleaned the one room with the stove until it gleamed. From the attic, I dragged down an old table and scrubbed it clean. It became my command post. Every evening, I climbed the hill, not just to find a signal, but to hold a war council. Marcus Jones and I united by a single purpose. He became my eyes and ears in the city, in that other world that now felt lifeless to me. "Mrs. Reed," he reported in his calm, deliberate tone. "We've filed a complaint with the district attorney's office for mortgage fraud. I've also sent an official notice to the bank, attaching your medical records from the period the contract was signed. They are required to begin an internal investigation." "Good," I said. "What's next?" "Next, Mrs. Reed, we wait. The first shots have been fired. Keep yourself busy. They'll make their move soon." And I did keep busy. I found an old shovel in the shed and began turning over a patch of ground in front of the house, clearing it of years of tangled weeds. The soil was hard, the roots deep, but with every stubborn thistle I pulled, I felt something in me loosening too. It wasn't just the land I was freeing. It was my own soul, ripping out the remnants of blind love, obedience, and self-sacrifice. Painful, yes, but cleansing. And then, on the 5th day after that call about the mortgage, the bomb dropped. That evening, as usual, I spoke with Marcus. But this time, there was something different in his voice, a note of restrained triumph. "Well now, Mrs. Reed," he began without preamble. "The ice has broken. This morning, a courier delivered a certified letter to your old address, addressed to your son and his wife." I pictured it. Morning light spilling into my kitchen, the two of them drinking coffee, discussing cabinet colors. A knock at the door. The courier. They sign without thinking, open the thick envelope. "What was in the letter?" I asked. "An official notice from me, acting as your legal representative," he replied. "It confirms your full and sole ownership of the condo and warns that any attempt to conduct transactions involving the property will be legally blocked. Most importantly, it demands that they provide an explanation within 24 hours regarding the mortgage, which we assert was obtained through fraud." I listened in silence, letting each word sink in. "But that's not all," Marcus continued. "This morning the bank's security department also responded, swiftly and decisively. All accounts accessible to your son, including credit cards and joint savings, have been frozen pending investigation. Mr. Harrison, the head of security, oversaw it personally. Frozen. What a perfect word. Their glittering world, built on my money and my misplaced trust, was now sealed under a sheet of ice." "Did they try to do anything?" I asked, though I already knew. "Oh, yes," Marcus said with a faint laugh. "The bank called me first. Your son stormed in, shouting, threatening, demanding explanations. When they told him that nothing would be released until the investigation was complete, he turned pale and left. An hour later, his wife arrived, made quite a scene, screaming about consumer rights, threatening lawsuits. They politely escorted her out. Their world, Mrs. Reed, is collapsing, faster than they ever imagined. I sat atop the hill, wind tugging at my hair, looking down at the dark outlines of the town below. I felt no hatred, only a deep, quiet sense of balance returning. Justice isn't revenge. It's the restoration of the natural order. Then my phone rang again. Darren. I ended the call with Marcus and answered, "Mama, what did you do?" It wasn't the voice I remembered. Gone was the smooth, condescending tone he'd used for years. This voice was high, strained, cracking with panic. I said nothing. "Are you out of your mind? We got some papers from a lawyer. The bank froze all our accounts. We can't even buy groceries. Are you trying to ruin us?" His voice shook with fury and fear. Behind him, I heard Tiffany sobbing. Not quietly, but with loud, dramatic wails. "Do you even understand what you're doing?" he shouted. "Tiffany is sick. She can't take this stress. And you're destroying our lives because of your old-age senility." "I didn't do anything, Darren," I said softly, evenly. The calm in my voice was louder than his screams. He fell silent. "You did all this, you and your wife." "What? What did we do?" "We gave you a gift, bought you a house, and this is how you repay us. You tried to steal my condo, Darren. You took out a mortgage against it while I was sick and dying. You left me here so I wouldn't find out until the bank took my home. That's what you did." A dead silence hung on the other end of the line, as lifeless as the silence in this town. I could only hear his heavy, uneven breathing. He hadn't expected this. He thought I knew nothing. He thought it was just hurt feelings. Just a scene. But it was a verdict. "Mama," he finally rasped, his tone shifting to pitiful pleading. "Mommy, this is all wrong. It's a mistake, a misunderstanding. We'll explain everything. How about you call it all off, huh? Withdraw the papers. We'll come and talk. Come on over," I said. "Really?" Hope flickered in his voice. "You'll call it off?" "No," I replied. "I said come on over. I'm waiting for you." I hung up. That was it. Now they knew. This wasn't a tantrum. It wasn't hurt pride. It was war, and they knew that I knew their darkest secret. Now their panic would turn to despair, and despair drives people to madness. I walked down the hill. The night was dark. They arrived the next day, close to noon. I heard them long before I saw them. The roar of an engine tearing through the quiet of the sleeping town. Tires screeching to a stop beside my house. Dust rose in a tall column, settling over the wild currant bushes. I didn't move. I sat on the same porch where they had dumped me days earlier, cleaning small new potatoes with an old knife. Tiny ones, the size of quail eggs, from the overgrown garden. My lunch. The car door slammed almost at once. Darren jumped out first, pale, haggard, dark circles under his eyes. His expensive shirt was crumpled, as if he'd slept in it. Tiffany followed slowly behind him, her face swollen, makeup smeared, but still trying to hold her head high with that familiar look of superior disgust. They stopped a few feet from the porch, staring at me. I didn't lift my head, just kept carefully peeling the thin skin from a potato. The simple, steady rhythm grounded me. I wasn't part of their drama anymore. I was only watching. "Mama," Darren began, his voice hoarse and pleading. He stepped forward, hands half extended as if for a hug. I didn't move, just kept my eyes on my hands. "Mommy, what is this? Why are you doing this to us?" I dropped the peeled potato into the bowl of water and reached for the next one. "I was waiting for you," I answered without looking up. That simple sentence threw him off balance. He had expected shouting, accusations, maybe tears. Anything but this cold, detached calm. We came to talk," he stammered. "Mama, this is all a terrible misunderstanding. We're family. Families are supposed to help each other, not sue each other." His words sounded rehearsed, proper, polished but hollow. There wasn't a drop of sincerity in them, only fear. Fear of losing everything he thought he deserved. Then Tiffany snapped. She shoved Darren aside and stepped forward, her face twisted with malice. "Enough with this circus!" she spat. "Have you completely lost your mind out here in the sticks? What right do you have to block our accounts? Who gave you that right?" Her shrill voice grated against the quiet air. "Do you even realize what you've done?" she shrieked, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at me. "You're embarrassing us. We had to cancel the kitchen order. Cancel it. People are laughing at us. And me? I'm not supposed to be stressed. The doctor forbade it. I'm carrying your grandchild, and you're driving us into poverty." She played her trump card, the pregnancy. Once that single word would have melted my resolve. I would have forgotten everything and rushed to make things right. But not now. The ice in my chest didn't even crack. I slowly raised my eyes to her, calm, steady, unblinking, as one might look at a strange, unpleasant object. My gaze made her falter. For a moment she was silent, but then anger surged back, painting her face red. Darren stepped in quickly, trying again to play the peacemaker. "Mama, please. Tiffany's right. She can't be nervous. Let's just fix this, okay? We were wrong. Maybe this house wasn't the best idea, but we'll make it right. We'll take care of everything. Just call your lawyer. Tell him you've changed your mind. Right now. Here, take my phone." He held out his sleek smartphone toward me, as if that simple act could erase all the lies, all the betrayal, as if everything could be wiped away like words written in sand. I set the knife and the last potato into the bowl, wiped my hands on my apron and slowly stood up. Now we were face to face, they on the ground, and I one step above them on the porch. "You want me to call it all off?" I asked quietly. Yes, Mommy," Darren said quickly. Tiffany stood beside him, lips tight, defiant. "So I can give you my retirement money, my condo, my life, all over again?" "Mama, don't exaggerate," Darren said, grimacing. "The condo is ours together. We would have always taken care of you." "Like you took care of me when I was sick?" I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper that cut through the stillness. They froze. I turned my gaze to Tiffany. She instinctively stepped back. "I remember everything, Tiff," I said, using the nickname she'd once loved. "I remember you sitting by my bedside. I remember your caring hands. And I remember the papers you gave me, telling me they were for the tax office, for the HOA, just a formality." Tiffany's face turned ghostly white. The spite, the rage, the false confidence, all of it washed away like cheap makeup in the rain. Only raw animal fear remained. Darren looked from me to her, confused. "Mama, what are you talking about?" I looked at my son again. There was fear in his eyes, but also confusion. Maybe he truly hadn't known every detail. Maybe she had deceived him, or maybe he had simply chosen not to know. It didn't matter anymore. He was an accomplice. "I'm talking about the mortgage, Darren," I said, enunciating each word. "The big mortgage you took out at the bank 8 months ago, using my condo as collateral, with my signature. The signature you got when I was delirious. Did you really think I'd never find out? That I'd quietly die here in this shack, and the bank would take my home for your debts?" The word struck him like a physical blow. He staggered, as if punched in the gut, and turned to Tiffany with horror. And something else, a dawning realization. She didn't look back at him. Her gaze stayed fixed on the ground, on her expensive shoes now stained with country dirt. All their tricks, all their manipulations, gone. They stood before me stripped of pretense, naked in their greed and lies. The masks were off. The show was over. "So, Darren," I finished evenly, "do you still want me to call the lawyer?" He couldn't answer. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish stranded on the shore. Tiffany shrank beside him, her shoulders drawn tight, transformed from a predator into a cornered animal. The silence stretched, heavy and final, and in that silence, the last drop of my maternal love for him died. It died there, right beside the rotten porch. Leave, I said. It wasn't a plea or a command. It was simply a statement of fact, like saying, "It's raining," or "Night has fallen." They turned away in silence, not looking at each other, puppets whose strings had been cut, and walked toward their expensive gleaming car. The engine started, not with a roar but with a weary sputter. Slowly, almost uncertainly, the car turned and rolled down the dusty road. I remained on the porch. Next to me sat the bowl of cleaned potatoes. My lunch, my new life, and the air around me felt wonderfully clean. After they left, silence fell again. But it was a different kind of silence. Not dead or suffocating like on the first day, but calm, full of dignity. I boiled the potatoes on the stove. They tasted like the most delicious food in the world. I ate slowly, sitting at my spotless table, and looked out the window I had finally unboarded and washed. Beyond it lay my overgrown yard, and among the weeds I saw a few surviving peony bushes. Their dark red buds were tight, ready to bloom. I thought that was the end. That, exposed and defeated, they'd leave me alone and clean up their mess. But I underestimated them again. A cornered animal doesn't seek forgiveness. It looks for one last chance to bite. About a week passed. During that time, I met my only neighbor. Or rather, he met me. One morning, I was hauling a bucket of water from the well when I heard a calm, low voice behind me. "Here, neighbor, let me help you. Turning that windlass isn't a woman's job." I turned around. Standing before me was a tall, lean old man with a gray beard and strikingly clear blue eyes. With one easy motion, he finished cranking the windlass, lifted the bucket, and set it gently on the ground. "Curtis Baker," he said, extending a broad, calloused hand. "I live in that house over there," he said, nodding toward a weathered cottage 2 properties down. "Last of the old guard in this town." "Evelyn Reed," I replied, shaking his firm, calloused hand. That's how our acquaintance began. Curtis, or Uncle Kurt, as he asked me to call him, turned out to be a former county commissioner. He was an old-school man, reserved, wise and grounded. He never asked how I'd ended up there. He didn't need to. He had seen the expensive car that brought me, and then drove away. He saw me alone, struggling to make that abandoned house livable, and he understood everything without a single word. He started helping me in quiet, practical ways. One day he'd bring a few dry logs, another, a jar of goat's milk. Sometimes he'd simply stop by in the evening, sit on the porch. His calm presence was a balm, a reminder that goodness still existed in the world. With him nearby, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt safe. And then, the final battle began. One morning, while I was watering my peonies, I heard the sound of engines. Not one, but several. A whole convoy was approaching the town. 3 passenger cars pulled up in front of my house, and people began to get out. I recognized them. My cousin, Aunt Carol from Raleigh, with her husband. My late husband's nephew, Darnell, and his wife. A few other distant relatives. Faces I'd only ever seen at funerals or weddings. And leading them, like 2 generals commanding an army, were Darren and Tiffany. Darren looked worse than before. Thinner, his eyelid twitching uncontrollably. Tiffany, however, had transformed. She wore a plain dark dress, no makeup, her hair pulled into a modest bun. Her face carried a mask of quiet sorrow, every line carefully arranged. She held Darren's arm tenderly, as though he might collapse at any moment. A perfect tableau, the grieving son and his devoted, suffering wife. They positioned the relatives in a semicircle, like witnesses at a trial, and after a small nudge from Tiffany, Darren began to speak. His voice trembled, not from fear this time, but from practiced emotion. "Dear ones, Aunt Carol, Darnell, thank you for coming," he began, his tone solemn and heavy. We called you because a tragedy has struck our family. A great tragedy." He paused dramatically, giving the words time to settle. The relatives turned their sympathetic eyes toward me. "Our mother, Evelyn Reed," he said, his voice thick with feigned grief. She's sick." "After her bout with pneumonia," Darren began, his voice quivering with rehearsed sorrow. "She started having mental issues. She forgets everything, confuses things. She's imagined conspiracies, imagined mortgages. She doesn't recognize us anymore. She even accuses us of terrible things." I stood there, still holding the watering can, listening to this theater of the absurd. I couldn't believe my ears. They had decided to declare me insane, to erase their crimes by turning them into the fantasies of a sick old woman. "We wanted to get her treatment," Tiffany continued in her delicate, mournful voice, dabbing the corner of a perfectly dry eye with a tissue. "We searched for the best doctors, a clinic, but she ran away. She found this abandoned house and hid here. She refused help, blocked all the accounts so we couldn't pay for her care. She's a danger to herself. We're afraid she might do something." Aunt Carol gasped and clutched her chest. "Evie, sweetheart, what is this? Come home, back to the city. You need to be treated in a hospital." They all looked at me as though I were a violent lunatic. In their eyes I saw a mix of pity, fear, and disgust. The verdict had already been decided. Darren and Tiffany's plan was devilishly simple and devastatingly effective. Who would believe a lonely, elderly woman living in a half-ruined house over a well-dressed, respectable son and his tender, pregnant wife? I said nothing. What could I say? Any word, any protest, would be labeled a symptom. "See?" they'd whisper. "Aggression, confusion, inappropriate behavior." It seemed I had lost this final, dirtiest battle. Then from behind me came the soft creak of the gate. "May I be nosy?" a calm voice asked. "What's this gathering about?" Everyone turned. Uncle Kurt stood on the path, dressed in his usual work clothes, his posture straight and commanding as a general's. His clear blue eyes swept over the group, pausing on Darren, then Tiffany, before settling on me. "And you are?" Tiffany demanded, her tone sharp, her gaze dismissive. "Me," he replied evenly. "I'm the neighbor, Curtis Baker. And who might you fine folks be, showing up here in a crowd to scare this woman?" "We're her relatives," Darren snapped. "And we came to rescue her. She's not right in the head." Uncle Kurt stepped closer until he stood beside me. He didn't look at me, but I could feel his steady presence like an anchor. "Not right in the head, you say?" he repeated, squinting slightly at Darren. "That's odd. I've been talking to Evelyn Reed for a week now, and I see a perfectly sane, clear-headed, and strong woman, a woman whose own son dragged her out on her birthday and dumped her in this shack like useless garbage. I saw it with my own eyes." A murmur rippled through the relatives. Aunt Carol turned toward Darren, doubt flickering across her face. "And I also see," Uncle Kurt continued, his voice firm and rising, "a woman who's turned this broken-down shack into a home, all by herself, without help from anyone. She lit the stove, cleaned up, and tended the garden. Is that how crazy people behave?" Uncle Kurt asked. "No. That's how people behave when everything has been taken from them, but not their will to live." He stepped closer to the gathered relatives, his calm voice now cutting like steel. "And as for you two young folks," he said, shifting his gaze to Tiffany, "you seem strange to me. You arrived in an expensive car, dressed to the nines, yet claim your mother cut off all your funds. How'd you get here on your last dime? And you don't look like grieving children. You look like con artists, here to squeeze an old woman for her last bit of money. Only this time, instead of threats, you're using tears and lies." His words hit their mark. The relatives, who had come full of sympathy for Darren and Tiffany, now turned suspicious eyes on them. Their well-rehearsed play was falling apart. Aunt Carol stepped toward me. "Evie, is it true? He kicked you out?" I simply nodded. That single gesture was enough. The lie burst like a soap bubble. Whispers spread through the crowd, growing louder and harsher. Darnell, my late husband's nephew, a tall, broad man, strode up to Darren, his face dark with anger. "What in the world are you doing, you scumbag?" he growled. "Trying to drive your own mother to her grave?" Darren stumbled back. Tiffany grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the car. Their public trial had become their public disgrace. The relatives who had come as their judges now looked at them with disgust. One by one, the cars turned and left in silence, raising clouds of dust that slowly drifted away. When the last engine faded, only Uncle Kurt and I remained on the road. I turned to him. "Thank you," I whispered. He smiled under his gray beard. "Don't mention it, neighbor. Telling the truth isn't help. It's a duty." As the dust settled, so did everything that had tied me to my old life. They hadn't lost in court or at the bank. They had lost here, in front of ordinary, decent people. And that defeat was far worse than any financial ruin. It was moral bankruptcy, total and irreversible. After that day, I never heard from them again. Marcus Jones, ever steadfast, saw the case through. The bank recognized the mortgage as fraudulent, especially after several relatives testified about Darren and Tiffany's behavior and their attempt to have me declared incompetent. All charges against me were dropped. I never bothered to find out what happened to them afterward. I only know they faced criminal charges for fraud and finally met the consequences of their choices. Without my help, without my money, and without my forgiveness, their world, built on deceit, collapsed and buried them under its ruins. And me? My life was just beginning. At 63. The first thing I did once the legal dust had cleared was sell the condo on Peachtree Road. I felt no regret. I went there only once more to collect what truly mattered. My photo album, a few cherished books, and Paul's old armchair as I walked through the hollow. Echoing rooms, I felt a touch of nostalgia. But no sadness. The place no longer felt like home. It was just property now, cold and distant. My real home was here, in this quiet, half-forgotten town. With the money from the sale, and the savings Marcus helped me protect, I invested wisely, modest, reliable, and secure. This gave me the most important thing. Certainty. The certainty that I would never again depend on anyone, that I could pay for my own treatment if needed, buy firewood for winter, and replace a roof when the time came. I began to build, not just a home, but a life. I hired a small crew from the nearby county seat. 2 sober, hard-working men. They replaced the roof, installed new wooden windows, built a proper old-fashioned stove with a hearth, and constructed a sturdy porch that no longer creaked or swayed. I didn't just supervise them. I worked beside them, carrying, painting, cleaning. At first, they were surprised. Then they began to respect me. "Evelyn, you're something else," said their foreman, Mitch. "You've got more backbone than most men." I smiled. I hadn't realized I had a backbone. All my life, I'd thought of myself as soft, pliant, accommodating. But the strength had always... Before my eyes, the house transformed. The dark, lifeless shack became a bright, welcoming cabin. I whitewashed the walls myself, hung gingham curtains patterned with tiny flowers, set Paul's armchair in the corner, arranged my books neatly on the shelves, and the place seemed to breathe again. In the spring, I turned to the garden. Uncle Kurt helped me uproot the dead trees and mark out a vegetable patch. For the first time in my life, I planted potatoes, carrots, and onions with my own hands, tending each sprout like a child. And the earth, sensing care, rewarded me with abundance. The peonies I had first noticed that day grew into a huge, magnificent bush, blooming so vividly it took my breath away. I remembered how my grandmother once taught me to embroider. I found the old hoops in a chest, bought thread and canvas in town, and began again. Simple patterns at first. Flowers, birds, small ornaments. My fingers remembered. The quiet rhythm soothed me. It helped my thoughts fall into order. I no longer spoke to Paul's photograph. I no longer needed to. He was with me. In the stillness, in the warmth of the stove, in the strength I'd found. Uncle Kurt and I became true friends. We didn't pry into each other's souls, but we understood everything, without a single word. In the evenings, he often stopped by for tea, brewed from the herbs we gathered together in the woods. We sat on my new porch, sipping from old earthenware cups, watching the sun sink behind the trees. Our silence spoke more deeply than any conversation I'd had in the past 10 years. Sometimes I thought about my son, but no longer with pain or resentment. What I felt was compassion, the kind you feel for a lost stranger. I had raised him, given him everything I could, but I couldn't give him what he lacked. A conscience. That wasn't my fault. It was his choice. And so I let him go, cutting the final invisible thread that bound me to him. He was no longer my duty, my sorrow, or my burden. He was simply a man who had once been my son. I'm 65 now. I sit on my porch with a cup of tea brewed from herbs grown in my own yard. The sun sets beyond the forest, painting the sky in breathtaking colors. The air smells of fresh-cut grass and wildflowers. Inside, the fire crackles softly in the stove. A stray kitten I named Vasia purrs in my lap. I look down at my hands. Rough from work, no longer manicured but strong. These are the hands of someone alive, someone who builds her own life. Sometimes I think I should thank Darren and Tiffany. Without their cruelty, I might still be living as a shadow in someone else's life. I might never have discovered what I was capable of. I might never have met Uncle Kurt or seen my peonies bloom, or tasted the clean water from my own well. They tried to bury me, and instead they gave me life. A real one. I take a sip of my tea. Tart, fragrant, alive. And I realize dignity isn't something others give you. It isn't their respect or their approval. Dignity is what you find within yourself, what you reclaim from fear, resentment, and despair, what you take back when everything seems lost. And that quiet, hard-won victory, that is true happiness. That is true freedom. Did you like my story? If you listened till the end, drop a 1 in the comments. If you enjoyed it, you can support me by liking the video or sending a small tip. I've got plenty more real-life stories like this one on my channel, so make sure to subscribe and check them out. I've added 2 of the most loved stories on screen.